Repairing a 5-inch gauge Modelworks Pannier tank, part 7, making a replacement oil feed pipe from the mechanical lubricator to the steam chest. Even though the job itself was simple enough to do, the pipe was quite difficult to fit in place. The job starts by taking some measurements. The measurements are approximate, but it will give me some idea of how long I need to make the pipe. If the pipe is too short, that would not be good. If the pipe is a bit on the long side, it can be bent to make it fit in place. In this video, I do not show me silver soldering the oil pipe. If you want to know more about silver soldering, please watch my video, How to Silver Solder for Beginners. Now for a bit of CAD, Keith Appleton design. On a piece of paper, I wrote the dimensions down so I wouldn't forget them. As I mentioned previously, these sizes are approximate and a little bit on the long side. Here's a spring-loaded check valve at the steam chest end, and here at the rear of the engine is the outlet from the oil pump. After a quick visit to the outer part of my workshop, I silver soldered unions onto the end of the pipe, not forgetting to fit the union nuts on the pipe first, as shown here, and then using my very small microcosm pipe bender, I bent one end of the pipe to go to the check valve on the steam chest. I'm going to bend this long oil pipe to follow the path of the existing piping where possible. The long length of pipe also needs to be above the brake components, not like this. And at no point in its travel from the output from the oil pump to the inlet of the check valve, the pipe must not touch the chassis or any moving parts. I started off the job by bolting the pipe to the check valve on the steam chest. In this clip I'm unbolting the pipe because it's not in the right place. I had to pull the pipe back all the way to make sure that it was above the brake beams, and also the pipe needs to be carefully bent to follow the curves of the existing piping. This is 5/32 or 4mm pipe, and it's quite easy to bend. Well, it is at first, but once you start bending it and unbending it, in these areas the copper pipe is going to start work hardening. Then it's going to need annealing, and I'm trying to avoid that. At this stage I reconnected the pipe to the check valve on the steam chest, and you can clearly see it's not fouling any of the front suspension or axle. I did notice at various points on the original piping were the remains of pieces of masking tape, probably used to hold the original oil piping in place. I may do the same, but I use cable ties rather than masking tape. This bend is very important. It matches exactly the original piping so that it clears the crank axle. The piping on this locomotive is very untidy. Like a lot of things on this locomotive, the piping is very badly fitted. This part took forever, tightening the union nut onto the banjo union of the oil pump's output, just using a small spanner. This clip shows the oil pipe in place on the banjo union from the outlet of the pump. Here's another shot of the same area with the camera panned out a little bit, and you can see what a mess the piping is. Really though, however you do the piping, you can't win. On the 7¼ gauge Titch locomotive that I built, which I used to run around my garden, I took great pains to make sure the piping to the injectors was very symmetrical and looked good. But one of the so-called experts at the club said, "Oh, what you doing, making a trombone?" in a voice pretty much like that. I know which I prefer. I like the piping to be tidy. At the moment, my oil pipe still needs a bit more bending to make it more closely follow the existing pipe routes. All this piping along the route of the oil pipe is water piping, cold water piping. So when I've finished all the bending and it's where I want it to be, I think I'll tie it in place to the original piping using cable ties. I think that's a better idea than using masking tape. In anticipation of the oil pump working, I've disconnected the union at the front so I can see the oil coming out. Time to run the engine. Even though the locomotive is running quite well now, there's no sign of any oil coming out of the pipe at the front. I wonder why that is. I'm sure this middle bit of the pump is supposed to go round. The question is, what is the problem with it? This lubricator is of the Sprag clutch type. A special clutch that grips the shaft when you turn it one way and doesn't grip it when you turn it the other way, so it acts a little bit like a ratchet. And alas, this one does not work. I need to remove the oil pump and mend it. I'm going to make a separate video, not in this series, showing how I repair this type of mechanical lubricator. Personally, I do not like the Sprag clutch type. I've had problems with them in the past. I really do prefer the standard ratchet lubricator or the Jubilee fittings lubricators that don't need a clutch. An eccentric just rocks back and forth. From my experience, the Jubilee fittings lubricators are trouble-free. To be honest, as this is a Modelworks type of lubricator, I didn't think it was going to work. When it's semi-dismantled, it tries to work, but that's no good at all. I need to strip this down and completely rebuild it, making sure every part is right. It's the only way to go, as this is a very important part. Here is the lubricator sat on a piece of cloth to soak up all the oil that's currently running down inside it. I've refitted the banjo union, more about that later. Here are most of the parts on the piece of cloth. Unfortunately, during the removal of the pump, by removing the banjo union, the spring and ball fell out onto the bench. In this clip you can see the tiny stainless steel ball just above the copyright notice. And here is a spring and ball on the piece of cloth. This is a magnified image of the previous one. I'm going to put these tiny parts in a small sealable polythene bag. Here you can see the full kit of parts minus the O-rings. I think I'll change the O-ring seals, depending how good the originals are when I look at them closely. In my opinion, the way that this oil pump mounts to the footplate of the locomotive is a terrible design. I like all parts to be serviceable, and to remove the pump you have to dismantle the banjo union and, as you've just seen, possibly lose the ball and spring. By drilling a hole next to the main hole in the centre, then turning the hole into a big slot to match the centre hole, it will then be possible to remove and reinstall the pump at any time without having to mess about with dismantling the banjo union. This will be a job well worth doing. But that's it for now. Please stay safe, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.